So in my recent video discussing Destiny 2's new difficulty changes since Lightfall, I held the opinion that these changes weren't too bad at all, and I actually really liked them for most of the content. But I also acknowledge that there are some areas of the game now that do feel worse. And it's really only in content that has champions. Now the idea behind champions is something I've actually always liked, specific mini-boss kind of enemies that need to be focused, definitely helps shake up the moment-to-moment gameplay. And I do like that about champions to a degree. But as a whole, I've always found that how Bungie implemented champions has always been more annoying than challenging. Truly, champions are not hard. They just restrict your loadout options, they're beyond the point of bullet sponges, they're like nuclear missile sponges, and to add insult even further, they are very buggy when it comes to their stun mechanics. Now in that video, I threw out the idea that Bungie just ought to remove champions entirely, to which some of you agreed, but some of you didn't, and that's totally fine. And honestly, I don't think I want them to be removed. As a whole, again, I like the idea of champions, but I have a problem with how they're currently implemented. And a few comments on that video led me to making this video to clarify and expand upon what I want from champions in Destiny 2. And here's an example of one of those comments. Destiny 2 players be like, I want to have more challenge. Bungie adds champions. Destiny 2 players, champions are too hard and annoying, please remove them. Now this comment of course misses the point that a lot of us try to make when we talk about champions, because when I say I want more challenge, that doesn't mean I want enemies that force specific weapon loadouts, and have ridiculously high health pools that regenerate. This is what champions currently do. They've never been fun to fight. They're boring enemies. They slow the gameplay way down. And I will give Bungie some credit for adding ways to stun champions with abilities. That's helped out a little bit, even though the stun doesn't always work with abilities. Like recently with Strand, we have that Strand dive attack that only sometimes will stun a champion, again because it's so buggy. But really my problem lies with the fact that if I want to go into a Legend or Master Law Sector, or any content honestly that has champions, I should be allowed to use any weapons that I choose. I should not be forced to use specific weapons or abilities even for only a few of the enemies inside. I like the idea of needing to optimize a build for a Law Sector, but it should still be a build that allows for complete freedom on my end, that doesn't have me saying, okay, which weapons this season is Bungie making me use? Because that honestly just sucks, and it has sucked since champions were introduced in Shadowkeep. Now the question is, how do we fix champions? Well, there's a number of ways you could go about addressing them. Some of you in the comments have thrown out the idea of champions not being able to regenerate health, keep the mechanics as is, but just no regenerating. Or some of you have said any weapon should have the option to apply overload, unstoppable, or anti-barrier rounds. And these are fine enough ideas on their own, but here's what I think Bungie ought to do to make them a bit more interesting. So some of you may remember Berserkers from the Scourge of the Past raid. They were enemies that were immune to damage until you got close enough to them when they popped a suppression shield that would suppress your abilities if you were too close, but would leave them vulnerable to damage on their front side and back side. You would need someone to damage the front of them while someone damaged the back, which would stun them and allow you to kill them. This enemy released before champions were even in the game, and the mechanics for the Berserker would be my ideal barrier champion. It requires some teamwork and a unique strategy to take it down. Now for solo play, maybe these would need a slight tweak where instead of a front and back at the same time to stun, there's 2 crit points that need to be destroyed in quick succession or something like that while you're inside the suppression shield. They don't need to be exactly like they were in Scourge of the Past, but if champions were a bit like this, you'd be free to use whichever weapons you want, but still would be presented a challenge that shakes up the moment-to-moment gameplay. These enemies would still need to be priority targets. And I do want enemies like that. Enemies that require different strategies to take down than just the normal shooting. And things like Berserkers could be that. And the current implementation of champions I feel like are a much lazier version of that. And I hate to use that word, lazy, but current champions really do feel like such a lazy design that number 1, hinders your freedom of choice, and number 2, are just tedious bullet sponges. So barrier champions becoming more like Berserkers feels like a good middle ground. And before you say, well, what about Vex or Hive or Cabal? Berserkers are fallen. All you have to do, and again, I'm not a game dev, but all you have to do is give those barrier champions Berserker mechanics. They don't have to look like Berserkers to have the same mechanics. Just the same way we currently have a bunch of different enemy models right now that have anti-barrier mechanics. Now what about Unstoppable and Overload? Well, let's first take a look at overloads. I think similar to Tormentors, Overloads should have crit points that need to be destroyed on them that once destroyed will stun them and remove damage resistance. So instead of using a specific weapon to stun them just by shooting them for 2 seconds and then swapping to a heavy to dump damage into them, now they can be stunned with any weapon once you take out the crit spots. And then I think a nice bonus would be, again, they do not regenerate health. Because currently Overload health regen is extremely annoying because despite Bungie saying that you can stun them immediately after they recover, that is simply not the case, whether it's due to a glitch or the netcode or whatever. So you can play exactly by Bungie's rules, but still just watch the enemy regen health even if you're dumping Overload rounds into them. So I think just getting rid of health regen entirely might be the only way to fix this, unless Bungie can sort out that bug or fix the netcode issues, which let's be real, that will never happen. And as for Unstoppables, I think they should have a point in their health, like maybe 75% health, where once you get them down that first 25%, they get stunned and their damage resistance is removed. That's it. Nothing crazier than that. You know, it still fits inside the theme of Unstoppables being enemies that charge in on you and are intimidating at first, until you break a threshold of health that stuns them. And you know, maybe you could bump that down to like 66% or something, like removing a third of their health before they get the resistance removed. Something like that sounds pretty good to me. Now these aren't perfected ideas, and you could probably expand on these ideas or reworks to be even better than what I've proposed here. But the point in bringing up the idea of making changes like this is the fact that the mechanics would not require specific weapons or abilities to work. And I cannot begin to tell you how much better I'd feel about champions as a whole if they didn't limit my loadouts, and if they didn't regenerate health. And I keep hearing about increased health for enemies in Patrol or Vanguard Ops' artificial difficulty, but health regenerating enemies that force specific weapons are real difficulty? Really? Imagine playing Dark Souls and spending all this time fine-tuning and upgrading your build, then having areas where the game says, sorry, you like using a greatsword? Well, for this encounter you gotta equip a dagger, or else you can't stun the enemies, which takes away damage resistance. Oh, and by the way, they will regenerate health unless you keep stunning them with that dagger. That would be garbage game design. And the reason I bring up Dark Souls is because other comments on that video said, D2 is too hard now, and if you want difficulty, go play Dark Souls. Like, dude, Dark Souls is easier than Destiny 2 in a lot of ways. Dark Souls does not force me to use specific weapons for certain mobs. And Bungie's idea of challenge right now is telling you which weapons you can use and which weapons you cannot. And if you don't use those weapons, the enemies will regenerate health. That's worse design than anything found in the Souls games. Now there's more than a few reasons I don't believe Bungie will ever consider changing how champions work, and one of the biggest is weapon seasons, as Bungie put it a few years ago. Bungie wants the meta to shift each season at least a little bit, so when they force us to use specific weapons, they consider it a way to promote weapon diversity so we aren't always using the same loadouts. And I totally get that, for sure. We all remember Mountaintop Recluse Anarchy being the only loadout for basically everything. And I can certainly see some value in giving players a reason to use different weapons. However, I think there's better ways to go about promoting different loadouts than just forcing those loadouts. And artifact mods could still be that. You know, mods that give benefits to specific weapon classes for each season. Mods that aren't necessary for certain enemies, but you're still inclined to use them more based on the benefits. Again, I do want to reiterate that I do want enemies in Destiny 2 that need to be handled differently and present a challenge. Current champions are just tedious and annoying, at least to me. But Berserkers had to be handled very uniquely, and I want to see champions go that way in terms of design. Also, I think enemies like Wyverns are a good example of new enemies that you need to fight differently. I like fighting Wyverns, even if they don't have mechanics really. They are a different sort of challenge that you need to be wary of whenever they're in the arena with you. And I hope we see more enemies like that in the future. Tormentors and Lucent Hive are good additions that need a few tweaks, but more stuff like that is my preferred solution to difficulty, rather than the way champions currently exist. But as always, I'm curious to hear what you guys think in the comment section. What are your thoughts on champions as they are right now? And would you like to see more changes similar to what I suggested, or do you disagree entirely? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.